some introductions. All right, so my name is Amanda Saha. There should be at least 25, 30, 40 students on this call that know who I am, my students and folks that I've interacted with on campus. But I work over in the Office for Student Success here at Midway University, and I am excited to welcome you here to our kind of finale event to celebrate the conclusion of what has to be probably the weirdest semester in the history of the world, right? We're also concluding our Common Read program. So the Common Read program is something that was started a few years ago here at Midway. And what a Common Read program is that all first year students read the same book. And so you're familiar with the book. I wanted to take a little bit of time to let you know how we arrived at Braving the Wilderness. So that comes with saying thank you to our Common Read committee who assisted with selecting this year's book, Joe Ryan, Mackenzie Haynes, some library staff, folks from Student Affairs, and we had 2 students actually that sat on our committee this year, Alex Vorhaus and Jennifer Dones. And so our Common Read committee read books. We read several books. And together we came to the conclusion that Braving the Wilderness was going to be the book for us. In January, our discussions amongst the committee really focused on what themes that we wanted to focus on in Midway 101 with Common Read. And also, you know, what do we want to communicate to our first year students? So we wanted to, number one, pick up a book that everyone could read pretty quickly and easily, and this did the trick. It also touches on themes of belonging, family, tough conversations. We wanted to make sure that, you know, every student could find some relevance in the book that they were reading. And so we had no clue, of course, what was in store for us in 2020. We've battled a little bit of a health pandemic, social justice issues, social climate issues that are quite chaotic, and for many economic issues as well. So this, I think, was a perfect fit for 2020. So with that said, I think we've all had to have some tough conversations with family, maybe our classmates, about the election, how to wear your mask properly, like, and everything in between. So I think Braving the Wilderness was an excellent pick for a year like this year. With that said, tonight's speakers not only have read the book, but they know the work of Dr. Brene Brown, and I would say probably live it very confidently. I would encourage you all to take notes, ask questions, be courageous, curious, all those things. A few housekeeping items. It helps if you have your video on so the speakers know who they're talking to. And again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Or if you're really courageous, just put them out there. If you are wondering how your Midway 101 professor is going to know you are here, again, we will download a participant list at the end of the video. So we can tell them, I'll distribute that to them. So I will get straight to it and introduce our speakers. So joining us tonight, we have a brother and sister duo, Colene and Colmon Eldridge. Known as Coach Colene to many, she is the CEO of Be More Consulting, a consulting firm designed to support organizations in creating cultures of inclusion and success for female leaders. Colmon Eldridge currently serves as a government relations director for the Kentucky Education Association and has also served as assistant and senior advisor to Governor Steve Beshear. Colene and Colmon are both from Cynthiana, Kentucky, I believe, if we have any Cynthiana folks on the call. And they both currently reside in Georgetown. So with that, a very warm welcome to you both. We're excited to have you join us. So we will go ahead and get started.
All right, thanks, Amanda. Thank you all so much. Colman and I were just talking literally right before we hopped on, like 3 minutes before we hopped on, about how excited we were to be here with you all. One, it's not often that we get to do things together. So when people ask, we're like, yes, please give us the chance to do that. But I want to pull up some slides. Colman, if you have anything you want to say while I'm pulling up the slides.
I was going to say exactly what you said. I mean, the truth is, we are best friends. On top of being siblings, we literally live 6 minutes from each other, and this might be the most we've seen each other all week. So thank you all for engineering that for our family as well.
All right, so this is us. As Colman said, we are siblings, and Amanda mentioned this as well. We are not twins. We were born 15 months apart, though sometimes we like to tell people that we are twins just for fun, right?
It's fun.
We are best friends. I feel like we grew up in a home where that was just not an option for us to not be friends, and so that has transitioned with us through childhood, through high school years when it was probably a little bit tougher for us to be best friends, wouldn't you say, Colman?
Yeah.
And
High
then
school, first couple of years of college.
First couple of years of college, yeah. So then we both ended up at another private school up the street from you all, together at the same time. Now, I will say, as the younger sibling, I would maybe not always recommend going to school, going to college with your older sibling, especially if you are a female and your older sibling is your brother. It was a very interesting dating scene for me in college, the first 2 years with my brother being there with me.
I was there first. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, so we both have had careers in government. Both of us actually worked in state government at the same time. It was interesting because I was there first, and then he came a few years later and at a much higher level than what I was at. But we both are really passionate about service to others and serving our communities and serving the Commonwealth in both big and small ways. I also think we're both big dreamers, and we both really care passionately about the type of world that we create and our role in creating a better place for ourselves and for kids. And my brother has 3 boys, and so for my nephews and for his sons, we really care about like what kind of world we're going to leave for the kids that are behind us. And when we were talking about this, we were even thinking about the type of world that we're going to leave for you all, right? Like we don't like to think that we're that old, but we are several years out of college at this point. And so we were talking like what is the impact that we want this message to have on you all, and how will that impact both the Midway community at large and trickle into the rest of the world. But what we really want you to know is that both of us in various ways understand what it's like to feel like you don't belong. We really do know what that's like. We grew up in a household that was headed by a single mother. Our father passed away when we were young. So we had that piece where we didn't feel like our family looked like a lot of other families. We didn't have the same economic resources that a lot of other families had. But really, one of the biggest things is we grew up in Cynthiana, Kentucky for a big part of our lives, and we were one of very few Black students in our community, at our schools, and we went to private school for a good part of that as well. And so there were many years that it was just us as the only Black kids in the entire school. And then when we both transitioned to public school, I think we both kind of felt like we didn't always belong because we weren't, we were just talking about this, Colman and I we felt like we weren't Black enough for the Black students, and we were too Black for the white students. And so we really understand what it feels like to not feel like you belong. Colman, anything that you want to add to that?
Well, you know, when I was thinking about how we grew up and how that felt, and it wasn't something that we necessarily always talked about in our household. Our mother was and continues to be the kind of person that just says, whatever obstacle there is, you've got to make it past it. And so it wasn't something that really dominated how we saw ourselves, or how we how we existed in the world, but for the fact that it was sometimes extraordinarily lonely, and that oftentimes part of the otherization of Colene and I was that our interests didn't align with what either Black or white folks thought we should be doing. You know, I was a big kid in middle school and high school, and so there was this assumption that I should be playing football, not being in the school musical, that I should, you know, be doing some other things other than competing in speech and debate. And so part of that wrestling was we never fit the mold that society said we should, even though there were things about our lives, growing up in a single parent family, growing up in a poor single parent family, that people began to put their own assumptions on what the quality of our life and the outcome of our lives should have been at a very early stage. And so part of our resolve was just to kind of quiet the haters, and to keep a very much tunnel vision of what we valued, what we wanted, and really holding each other accountable to get there. I mean, Colene outlined a lot of things that we've been very fortunate and blessed to do in our lives. Each step, we have actually held each other accountable to things that we talked about when we were like 10 and 11. And we've not really deviated much from that, other than the fact that because we've held each other accountable and we've not been afraid to work towards those goals, all kinds of other doors and opportunities have opened because of that. And so it really taught us, I think, early on, that we had to be comfortable with that solitude of being kind of in the wilderness. That was kind of a theme throughout the book, and I know we'll talk about that later. But that sense of being comfortable with the uncomfortable nature of sometimes being by yourself, and you are only a handful of other people, seeing a different reality for yourself than maybe others can see. We had to quickly figure out that that was a necessity. And what I oftentimes tell my children, who are the two older ones are 11 as of yesterday, and 10, or 9 rather. I always say, you know, it always seems crazy and it always seems impossible until you do it. And then folks kind of look back, and you will always find two sets of people. They're the people who were in your corner and who always know you could do it, and gave you quiet and sometimes very vocal pushes to kind of keep moving forward. And then there are the people who will tell you they were always in your corner and were kind of the loudest naysayers. And you have to be able to disassociate yourself from that group, because those are the folks that will suck the most energy out of you if you let them. So,
Yeah.
Sis, back to you.
So when we were discussing what we wanted this to be like, we really did want it to be more of a conversation. We have some things that we want to share and some experiences that we want to share, but you know, the chat is open. And so as Amanda said, we really do want this to be really interactive and really participatory. If you all do ever have any questions along the way, please do not hesitate to ask us. We'll try to keep an eye on the chat box as we go. So we both just kind of shared a little bit about this understanding of what it feels like to not feel like you belong. And one of the things that, let me just start with this. I love everything Brene Brown. Like, I've read all of her books. I have watched all of her TED Talks. I have watched every video that she has done. She is like one of my personal heroes, just because she's brilliant at what she does. And she's been able to articulate, I think, the feelings that a lot of us have in so many ways. She's been able to articulate that because in a way that's...
We forgot to let Murphy out of the bathroom.
Okay, really quickly, I was going to tell the group to mute yourself, please.
Yes. and so I think she's just done a great job with her career of articulating a lot of feelings that I think a lot of us have felt, but don't always know how to articulate that. So the premise of the entire book, Braving the Wilderness, starts with this quote by Maya Angelou. And it's funny because when I was looking through the book, I read this book when it first came out. Like I said, I'm always the person that's like first in line to buy Brené's books. So when I was looking through it again and reading the notes that I had, I thought it was so interesting because I'd kind of forgotten that the whole premise was kind of based off of this Maya Angelou quote that says, "You are only free when you realize you belong no place. You belong every place and no place at all. The price is high. The reward is great." Colmon, did you want to talk about that?
You know, I think in a lot of ways that quotation speaks to a couple of the things that Coley and I have already shared. We are conditioned, I think, as human beings to feel that that belonging means that we have to find acceptance from everyone, whether it's our families, our friends, our folks that we go to school with, folks out in the world. I mean, there's like a whole industry that is based on being seen and valued and being able to influence others. And what we don't often talk about is the cost of that. You know, what does it require of your spirit and your soul to basically make yourself a commodity that's no different than like ketchup or makeup or the shoes that you put on. When you realize that's outside noise, right? That you belong anywhere that you are, and that you can't be pigeonholed by both where you are or where you dream to be, then you have the freedom to just exist in the how you need to exist to be free in the world. What really hit me when I read this quotation, and like Colene, I've known it for a while, is actually an interview that the singer, and I was going to say artist because she really is more than a singer, Nina Simone. She did an interview one time, and she was talking about, she was asked the direct question, what does it mean to be free? And she began talking about how when she's at the piano and her mind just goes to this place of whatever note I play is what I'm supposed to be playing, and whatever comes out of my mouth, even if it's not the words of the song as people remember it, that sense of freedom, that sense of creativity, that sense of being is when I'm most free. And when you then look at the trajectory of her life, she from that moment on lived in a state of freedom that I guarantee you 99.9% of people will never know. And she was judged for that. And folks said she was unsufferable to work with, that she was a diva, all of these things. But she had the courage to live in her truth in a way that didn't pigeonhole her, and in fact made others conform to who she was. And not that they had to conform themselves, but they had to conform their belief in who she was every time she presented herself. And I thought, if I could live in that sense of freedom, just like for a day, that day would be the most free of my entire life. And that she did it for 30 years was really instructive for not only the price you pay, but the reward is that you get to walk through life with a sense of dignity that we all should be so blessed to do.
And Colmon, I was thinking about this quote just in terms of like our lives together. And I think this is definitely something that you do significantly better than me in lots of ways. The idea of recognizing just belonging every place that you show up, right? And I think that there are times that I call you before a big meeting or a big conversation and I'm feeling a little nervous, and you're like, Colleen, if they invited you to be at this meeting, it's because you are supposed to be at this meeting, right? Like everyone at this table is on equal footing and you are exactly where you're supposed to be. And I don't know if it's necessarily a male or female thing, but I definitely think that you kind of take on that you belong every place that you are a little bit stronger than what I do. But I think that it's something to be noted because the price can be high for that feeling of like, do I actually belong here? And one of the things that I talk to my coaching clients about a lot is this belief in yourself. And I love that Brene Brown talks about, the wilderness is not just these external things, it's also the internal things too, right? It's like a sense of belonging with yourself. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in my coaching sessions are this idea of, trusting yourself. And I think a lot of people trust themselves to a certain degree, but they don't always trust that they will make the right decision. And I think one of the unique things about us, and because of the house that we grew up in, is this idea of you can figure it out, right? Like I think that we both are the type of people that truly know that we can figure out anything. We may not always like the options or the outcomes, but we can always figure it out. And so I often think about this in terms of how do I start to build a higher sense of trust in myself to recognize that it's not always just making the decisions, and people get so stuck on making the right decision. It's getting to the point where I can say, I made a decision and now how can I make it right? Even if it ends up not being the right decision. And to me, that is where you really start to brave that internal wilderness that is yourself.
Well,
And so,
let me go back, Colleen, for
yeah,
just a second, because one, thank you for the compliment. I got it from mom, so I definitely don't think it's our mother's the type of person who, even if she doesn't belong there, belongs there, and will walk in with a sense of dignity that I still try to emulate. What for me is most important is that I think we grew up in such an environment that we were never supposed to do the things that we were doing. And there just came a point where I said, okay, like I'm going to walk into every room as if I own the room. And it will, either it will work or it will blow up in my face. And what it really taught me was that if you don't demand a seat at the table, you will never get a seat. And if you're given that seat at the table and you don't demand it or you don't work for it, it's never truly yours. It's always at the whim of whoever gave it to you or what body gave it to you. And so what I've come to the conclusion of is that it's not necessarily walking through life with a bravado or cockiness or an ego, although I have been known to have those things.
no, never,
Yeah,
Colman,
I'm just
never.
saying. But it is about walking through life with a sense of purpose. And for me, that sense of purpose isn't necessarily what I figured out in that moment, but it's knowing that the steps I take, and literally it's one foot in front of the other, the literal steps that I take will get me to whatever that sense of purpose is. And that's a scary thing to kind of walk out each and every day on faith. Folks never believe that I'm actually an introvert. Like it takes a lot for me to get the courage to do something like this or to give the speeches that I've given, even though I've given speeches in front of thousands of people. Even the fear is part of that sense of purpose. And I may be 90 years old before I figured out what that sense of purpose is. I may die not knowing what the sense of purpose is, but understanding that whatever I leave behind is what's supposed to be there. And that's sometimes uncomfortable because we are such a culture that is that is really based on outcomes. That what's the outcome, what's the cost benefit analysis, all those other things. Life does not comport to that. No matter how hard you try to make it. And so um, if I could leave any bit of advice, it is walk with a sense of purpose and know that you may mess up. You may hit it out of the park. It may be somewhere in between, but everything that you do is purposeful for a reason that you may find or you may not find. But the goal of life is never to leave physical monuments behind. It is always to leave a spirit in the world that is better for you having been alive. And so the moments that you think, oh, it'd be nice to have my name up in here and a building named after me here, you're missing the point of what the purpose is. That really is something I think our mom taught both of us in a way that has really at our steps as adults. Sorry, Colleen,
Yeah.
I got way off track. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. So we really wanted to just start a conversation about what does true belonging mean? And so we'd love to hear from you in the chat. What do you think true belonging means for you?
As you guys are thinking about that, did want to share with Colleen and Colmon. I asked in the chat, do you trust yourself, and do you trust yourself to make good decisions?
Oh, good.
From this group, and we have about 190 students with us here, most of the students say that yes, they are absolutely able to trust themselves. I trust myself to make the right decisions. Heck no, I can't trust myself to order a steak properly. No, my ideas are awful. I trust myself than others do, honestly.
Yeah.
So lots of different comments there, but I thought some of them were funny.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the exercises that I give to my clients when we're talking about building that trust with yourself is like, go to a restaurant and order something that you want. Like, don't ask what everyone else is getting, because I think a lot of times we're like, oh, but what are you going to get? And then we just default to what someone else is getting. Like, trust yourself and know enough to know that you know what you want, right? Or go to a movie or watch a movie and don't listen to anyone else's feedback before you decide what you think about it, right? It's little things like that that you can do to start to build that trust with yourself that can lead to more confidence in how you do things and how you show up, and then becomes like, I know that I can figure out anything. I know that regardless of the decision I make, I can figure out how to make it work. So,
what that made me, I'm glad to hear kind of and see some of the comments. You know what it reminded me of, sis?
what's that?
When my freshman year in college, I thought it was a good idea to get engaged.
That was not a good idea.
That ended up not being a good idea.
I told him that was not a good idea when he told me that he was going to propose. I was like,
This is not about a victory lap. I just like we almost 20 years away from that.
Yes.
Yes, you did, and yes, you were right. But I will tell you that was one of the things that I was really sure about. Like I trusted my gut completely on that and absolutely got it wrong. And I will tell you, like in looking back on it, at the time it was devastating. Like it took me like a long time to kind of get over the whole of the relationship, not only not getting married, but the whole of the relationship. But that was one of those moments that I was like, yeah, but what did you learn in that process? And I learned what my values were, how much I valued myself, and how much in that moment I thought I knew what I valued and what my love and what my presence in that relationship was worth, only to figure out like I had totally sold myself short. So even in kind of like heartbreak, and between Colene and I am the hopeless romantic. Like I am the one who like grew up wanting to get married and wanting like kids and all of that other stuff. So, but even in that, like it ended up being something that gave me the confidence to know, hey, even mistakes like that give you purpose. And obviously the end of that story is I married my second college sweetheart, even though if she were here she'd be the first college sweetheart. That you got to learn how to like walk those lines. And like Colleen said, we've got three amazing kids. So you have to even take those moments to say, okay, it hurts right now, but it serves a greater purpose. And if you allow yourself, you find places where that sense of belonging is actually much more, much deeper than you gave it credit for.
Yeah.
And
So
you know what?
I
Yes.
love some of the comments about what does it mean. Well, one, y'all have some strong feelings about steak going
Sure
on in
do.
the comments. But I love that you all saying, you know, true belonging is really knowing yourself and not always caring about what other people think. And I do think that there is this level of not caring what other people think, but also balancing that with how can I fully engage with other people as well. I was just trying to look at some of the other comments, but yeah, I think you all are kind of spot on when it comes to what does that mean to be to truly belong somewhere. I also think true belonging is thinking about how do I still have these hard conversations and cultivate these relationships in those moments of hardness, right? Like true belonging is from an external perspective that I still love you even if I don't agree with you, right? I still respect you even if I don't agree with you. And I think especially in the last few years, we've kind of lost sight of that a bit, that idea of I can respect you and not agree with you. Colmon and I talk a lot about just civility and discourse. You know, we are both trained debaters. Like we spent all of our middle school, high school, college years competing as debaters. So with actual debate, there is structure and there is forum and there is room for discourse. In the real world, that's not always the case. And so we're always like, we wish that there was a way that we could say like point of order, like you're talking out of turn in actual conversations that doesn't always happen. But you know, when we talk about the sense of belonging, one of the things that Brene Brown talks about, not necessarily in this book, but in one of her other books, when she really gets into the research of shame and suffering, she says, in the absence of love and belonging, there is suffering. And so one of the things that always really hits really close to home for me is how do I create a sense of community, both personally and professionally in the work I do, that curates a sense of love and belonging, right? And so how do we stop people from suffering and spiraling in this sense of shame? How are we creating love and belonging in our communities and in the world? And so in this book, though, Brene describes true belonging as a spiritual practice and the ability to find peace in being part of something, but also the courage to stand alone. And when Coleman and I were talking about this idea of being peace and being a part of something, like having such peace and being a part of something, but also the courage to stand alone. I think back to, you know, college days and in my sorority, even when I was trying to be the voice of reason on something, and I'm a part of this group, but how do I speak up for something? And I spent a good part of my career working in HR and was an investigator of harassment, discrimination complaints. How do I speak up about something that I see that I know is wrong and still feel like I belong in a part of that community? I love the idea of it being a balance of both of those things, because I often think that when we think about belonging, we really only tend to focus on being a part of something, but forgetting that it takes that courage to stand alone. Coleman, anything you want to add about that?
You know what it reminded me of is when I got suspended from school for leading a protest.
Yes.
And I was so convinced that our mother would like ground me for life. And what she said was, look, I know why you did what you did. So just stay home, do your homework, and watch TV. I mean, like she had such a presence of mind to understand that even if it was just me kind of standing in the winds, and that I was ultimately going to take the fall for it, that because I was willing to do that, that it meant something, and that I knew the stakes, and still put, frankly, my perfect attendance record on the line, and all those other things, just to stand up for something I believed in. And again, kind of the right of our mother, the right and level-headedness of our mother was, she then took that suspension to the school board, and it was taken off my record. So I still graduated with perfect attendance.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to do those things. Even when there's a lot at stake, and even when you might be the only one that suffers the consequences. John F. Kennedy said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but success has a thousand fathers, but failure is an orphan. And what he was saying is, you've got to be willing to stand where you are, whether or not you get it right or get it wrong.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of get into a little bit more of the meat of the conversation and some of the key concepts. But one of the things that Brene Brown has talked about for years, but really kind of expanded upon in this book, is this idea of braving is all about trust. And she says when trust has this opportunity to be broken, we as humans kind of default to one of four things. We either fight, we flight, we freeze, or we defend. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Which one do you feel like you default to most when you feel like trust is being questioned in any type of relationship you have? Do you feel like trust is being questioned? Do you fight? Do you flight? Do you freeze? Or do you defend?
Got a lot of fighters.
Colin, which one would you say you default to?
Oh, I definitely freeze. I am the kind of person, and again, I think this is such a virtue of how we were raised. Although I think probably our answers are different on this, so that is also probably telling if I'm right. I don't trust a lot of people. My kind of inner circle is really small. And so if I've let you into that space, and you've breached that trust, I will often freeze until I figure out, well, one, I'll freeze you out. Like I am known to give cold shoulders like nobody's business. But then that cold shoulder really is kind of the part where I'm really trying to figure out, like, do I fight for this, or do I just like cut you out? And I will tell you, at 38, I've probably got a split record on that. But how about you, sis?
Yeah, I think I'm a mix between freeze, just because normally I'm so shocked by that breach of trust that it does kind of paralyze me a little bit to freeze, of like, oh, okay, I don't really know how to handle that. And I'm far less of a fighter in lots of ways than what I would say that would be your second one, but I'm less of a fighter than what you are. I'm just, my thoughts on a lot of things is like, we can agree to disagree, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. So
now, Colleen, go back for a second.
Okay.
Because this is a point, and you touched on it earlier, but I'm gonna at least expose kind of the rationale I think we both have for how we view this. So Colleen mentioned that our father died when we were young. I was 3. Colleen hadn't even turned 2 yet. Our father committed suicide, and the reason I bring that up is because in part, we didn't know that growing up for a while. There was a real concerted effort in our family to keep that from us, in a way to protect us. So when we found out, we kind of started the grieving process all over again. And then what came from that, I think, and sis, if I'm speaking out of turn for you, please let me know. But I think what came from that shaped how we view that fight, flight, freeze, or defend. I think who we were before that and who we became after that are vastly different human beings because of that one thing, that knowing changed, I think, that sense of not only belonging. I will say, I can only speak for myself, that what I wrestled with for a long time with our father's suicide was a sense that if he didn't want to belong in our family, and I'm named after him, so there was some added burden to that as well. Then who would want me? Where would I belong if my father didn't want to belong with us? And that took a lot. That took a lot out of us, I think, initially, and it took a lot to come out on the other side of. I think some of the remnants of that are still probably shaping how we would answer that question about trust.
Definitely. And every day is probably a little different too, every day and every person. So when Brene Brown talks about braving, she says B is for boundaries, right? This idea of setting boundaries. And when you don't know what the boundary is, you ask and you're clear about what's okay and what's not okay. And I think this is so hard for people. It's interesting because I just hosted a conference on Friday, and we had 200 women from all over the US, Canada, and the United Kingdom that attended this event. And when we started talking about, some of the struggles that they were having, the number one thing that came up was boundaries. That was like literally the number one topic. Everyone said, I just have a hard time setting boundaries and maintaining boundaries. And so boundaries is something that really is important for any healthy relationship, but it's also one of the ways that you can establish and measure trust. And then we have reliability, and that's just basically you do the things that you say that you want to do. And I loved one of the things that Brene talks about is the hard thing with reliability is you're not hustling for your worthiness. And so you're not completely overcommitting and not delivering. And I know with this was something that I probably still struggle with from time to time, that idea of not hustling for your worthiness. And Colmon kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier, this idea of, trying to prove people wrong. And I had this realization when I think I turned 31, and had this realization that I spent a good part of my life doing things to prove people wrong, and how exhausting that was, right? It's like Colmon mentioned this idea of this whole narrative about what our lives should be like or should have been like, and how people are often surprised that in spite of everything that happened to us in our childhood, I would say overall, we still had a very loving, caring childhood. And it shocks a lot of people. And so I felt like for a good part of my life, I just needed to prove everyone wrong. Everyone that doubted my capabilities, everyone that had made these assumptions about me, every politician that was out talking about, the plight of children raised by single moms. I put a lot of energy into hustling for my worthiness. And I realized that I was so tired of doing that I really needed to establish another way to prove worth to myself beyond just what I accomplished and beyond just the resume builders. And so this idea of reliability, I think, is so important because it is this balance of doing the things that you say that you're going to do, but also not overcommitting yourself in a way where you could never live up to the commitments that you made. And then the next one, the A in this, is accountability. So you don't back channel and blame, you hold people accountable in a straightforward way. And this is one that Colmon and I really wanted to talk about because in our household growing up, one of the ways that we showed love to each other, and still to this day, one of the ways that we show love to each other is by holding each other accountable to the things that we say we want to do. And, from a very young age, Colmon has talked about wanting to be involved in politics and wanting to be involved in making changes in the world. And I think every time now he comes to me and asks me questions about things, or he's considering something, I'm always the person that's the first to say, like, I support you 100%, but I need you to think about X, Y, and Z, right? And so, and there are times where I will notice that he's playing small in his ability to do something, or he'll notice that I'm playing small in my ability to do something. And I think we have this very unique relationship where we are able to call each other out on it. And some people see it from the outside and think, gosh, I can't believe your brother would tell you that. And I'm like, oh no, like, it's cool. I can hear it from him, right? And so holding each other accountable is, I think, one of the biggest ways that you can feel a sense of community and a sense of belonging. And I think we as a society oftentimes have it backwards, and we hear accountability and we hear it as criticism, or we hear it as judgment, when oftentimes it's, I love you enough to say that I want you to show up better than what you're showing up now. And it's not always an easy pill to swallow, but I think it's a necessary piece for building community and building a sense of involvement. Anything you want to add about accountability specifically?
Well, there are two things. I would say on I'm going to go up to boundaries again for just a second. Setting is one of the most selfish things you will ever do, and that's okay. If you are not willing to be selfish enough to set boundaries of how people will treat you, then people will treat you however they wish to. And so just know it is okay to be selfish.
Yeah.
With
Can I just say
accountability.
one thing?
Oh,
Sorry.
sure.
One of the quotes that I love is, you teach people how to treat you. And I think boundaries is a perfect example of that. You teach people how to treat you by the boundaries that you're willing to establish.
And then on accountability, I would say absolutely. You know, I tell my kids, always find someone that loves you enough to want more for you than you sometimes want for yourself. And I think that's exactly what Colene's talking about, that you know, our bond is so strong that, and we have grown up with this sense of knowing what we've wanted out of life, and being willing to work for it, that if we're playing small, if we're operating from a state of fear instead of a sense of purpose, we call each other out. And that is, I consider myself extraordinarily lucky to have that kind of relationship, not only with my sister, but my mother and my wife, and other friends that are just like, look, you aren't doing what you're not doing what you said you were going to do. So that goes back to that reliability. If you're willing to deceive yourself, then you'll be much more willing to deceive other people. But also that notion that you have to love folks enough to be honest, and that honesty can honestly be life affirming and changing if you allow it. Sis?
Yeah. So the other pieces of this braving are the vault. So holding things, being confidential for yourself, and information that's not yours to share. Integrity, choosing courage over comfort. I think that's a huge one, because I think we really value what's fun and fast and easy, oftentimes, over what's right. And the idea of holding yourself to a level of integrity to choose courage over comfort. The last two are non-judgment. So asking for help without feeling judged. And then lastly, generosity. And this is probably the one that I struggle with the most. And that is, when something happens, I assume positive intent. And I will say, honestly, I'm probably a person that if something happens, I'm like, why would you do this to me? Right. And I'm the person that won't always assume positive intent. I often joke that's probably one of my life's missions, is to figure out how to assume positive intent more often than not. So I would love to hear from you all in the chat box. Which one of these 7 do you feel like you do well, and which one do you feel like you struggle with the most out of the 7? So we had boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity.
So while y'all doing that, I'm going to speak to two things very quickly. The first is vault. And this is advice from somebody who is older than y'all, so take it or leave it. But when I was reading on this, the one thing that I kept thinking about with vault is my wife and I are completely different in this regard. My wife will share everything in the world on Facebook. Like if she stubs her toe, she will share it with Facebook. If she got a good cup of coffee, she will share. I mean, like everything. And we got in an argument a couple of years into our marriage because she assumed that if I didn't post like everything that she posted about how much she loved me, if I didn't do the same thing, that somehow meant that my affection or my love was not genuine. And I was like, look, I don't have to share my business with the world. Like that is not how we judge. Like, and if it is, if we got like some Truman Show thing going on, like you got to let me know, because like that is not what I signed up for. And so, my advice is you don't have to share everything with everybody. Love yourself enough to keep some things for yourself, and respect others enough that if they tell you something, you're not putting it on blast. You're not like going telephone and like, sending a text message like, girl, did you hear? Like, don't be that person. And then the other part is with generosity. I think I'm not the complete opposite, but a little bit. That I've been in politics enough that I don't necessarily always assume the worst. I just always assume some shadiness, which is not a good thing either. Like there's a middle ground to that. And lastly, someone said something. I think it was Hayden said something, and said something along the lines of cutting out toxic people is really hard. I'm going to brag on my wife now. Her relationship with her father has been toxic ever since I've known her. And I've known her, we've been together almost 20 years, which is hard to believe. Finally, she got to a place where she was like, look, I have wasted too much time and energy with the toxicity of this. And the toxicity of this relationship has actually put toxicity in other relationships that it didn't need to be. And so she basically said, look, and this was after actually reading this book. She said, look, you can choose to be a positive force in our lives and we'll continue to have a relationship. And if not, it's been a great ride. And unfortunately for him, he chose to kind of stay in his zone of toxicity. And that was hard for her. It was hard for our sons. But at the end of the day, the level of peace that we have as a family and the level of peace, frankly, that she has as a human being, was totally worth it. And it's so hard to do. But, at some point in life, you have to say it's you or me. And if you are in a space where you can choose you, 9 times out of 10, it's the right call.
Yeah. And it's funny because I actually don't think that cutting people out is that hard. I think when you really know yourself well enough and you have the values that you have, I often say, like, I just don't allow it in my life. Like, just flat out, and me, Colm, I just don't allow it in my life. Like, if someone is toxic, they are just not welcome to be a part of my life. And even if it's someone that's a family member that has become toxic, I just don't engage. Like, and I think that there is a level of like, how do I still show you that I honor and love you, but also honor and love myself? And so that's where oftentimes those hard conversations come into play.
He's also much nicer about it than I am.
I do tend to be nicer about it. So I'm gonna stop the screen share because I couldn't see what you all said. And I know we're running short on time, but one of the last things that I wanted to share with you all is a quote from the book that I really, it's like one of my all-time favorite quotes. And I will tell you, Colmon and I were overly ambitious with the amount of stuff that we had to talk about, because we were like, we can talk about this, and then we'll talk about this, and then we'll talk about this. So I wanted to go to, we broke it down by chapter, y'all. We were like ready. So I wanted to talk specifically.
I think a couple of things, the speaking truth to bullshit, that is something I would say can be an issue
Yes.
I don't know if there's any other theme students amongst the book that,
Yeah, what we'll do is if there were certain themes or topics that you really wanted to hit on, like let us know. There were so many good things that we were like, we could talk about this. So, I love this idea of speaking truth to bullshit, but do it in a civil way, right? This idea of being civil with each other. I also love that Brene talks about, one of the reasons that this is such a problem is people feeling compelled to know everything, the growing dismissal of trust in objective inquiry, and the overuse of false dichotomies. False dichotomies, I could talk for like 3 days on this, right? And that's the idea of you're either for us or you're against us. And I will tell you honestly, several months ago when people were talking about, and they still are, but just not as loudly as it was happening several months ago, Black Lives Matters and defunding the police. And I really felt like we as a country had an opportunity to have a nuanced conversation that we were not allowing ourselves to have. And I say this because I wrote a post on Instagram about the power of and the reason that I wrote it is because I'm married to a white male who is a police officer and I'm a Black female. And so I was in this mindset of like, yes, and what about this? And yes, and what about this? And I think that we kind of lull ourselves into this belief that it's this or that and no opportunity for gray area, when I think in so many cases it's this and that, right? It's yes, I support police, but I also support the right of people to protest, and I support why people are protesting. And so how do we allow ourselves to be okay in that gray area of and not feeling like I have all the answers, but recognizing that the power of and is what's missing from so many conversations. I can't see the comments. Is anyone saying anything?
On that comment we got, I agree, Colene, 100%. The way you treat others is a reflection of your own character and morals. I've been kind of typing in comments from your talk. The power of and is missing from so many conversations. Yeah, so we did get some feedback there.
Well, and I want you all to think about this in terms of your friend groups or your family circles, especially as a lot of people will be heading home post-election, and maybe your family has different views, or maybe your family has the same views. But, I think when we start to have these conversations, just thinking about how can I come to it from a place of curiosity and understanding and generosity and compassion, that someone else's views shaped the way that they see the situation, this exact same way that my views shape the way I see the situation. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some things that I think are fundamentally wrong without question, right? And I don't think that that's where we need to coddle and have an and conversation. I will tell you with unequivocally, racism is wrong, period, right? Racism is a system that is wrong, period. But I do think that having some conversations with people that think differently than you from a place of mutual respect, and I know Colmon had so much experience with this just when you worked in the governor's office and having to deal with people on both sides of the aisle in a way to get things done. But I think in our own personal lives, I am married to a person who politically does think differently than me in so many ways. But how do we still have these conversations with love and respect, and on that foundation of respect, and approach it from curiosity instead of accusations, right? Or approaching it from a place of humanity instead of, otherness, like you're other than me because you don't agree the same way that I believe.
That's a good one.
So I love, there were three quotes really in the book that I really wanted to leave you all with, that if you did not write these down or underline them, I think these are like pivotal parts of the book that they honestly make me a little emotional when I read them, because I'm like, yes, thank you, Brene, for saying this. And this one is, at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and at the end of my life, I want to be able to say that I contributed more than I criticized. And I would challenge you all to ask yourselves this question: are you contributing more than what you were criticizing? Because criticism is the easy piece, right? It's easy to sit back and say, well, they should do this or they should do that, or if I was them, I would do this. But how are you actually contributing to making something better instead of criticizing what other people might be doing to make it better? So that was one quote. And then the next one, I think, should be like tattooed on everyone's forehead. And that is: stop walking through the world looking for confirmation that you don't belong. You will always find it because you've made that your mission. Stop scouring people's faces for evidence that you're not enough. You will always find it because you've made that your goal. True belonging and self-worth are not goods. We don't negotiate their value with the world. God, guys, that is huge. We do not negotiate our value with the world. The truth about who we are lives in our hearts. Our call to courage is to protect our wild heart against constant evaluation, especially our own. No one belongs here more than you.
So I'll say both of those really struck home to me. This last one did, because you all will find as you get older that you have these moments where, when you don't stop, life will stop you. And so a little under 3 months ago, I had a heart attack, and I ended up in the hospital and having to have a surgery, and everything that could have gone wrong basically went wrong. So I went from only being in the hospital like 1 or 2 days to like 6. And I remember, and because it was in the time of COVID, my wife could come up only for a few hours a day, and then I spent the rest of the time by myself, except for when like the nurses and the doctors would come in. And I remember thinking, if I had died, if like everything had gone horribly wrong and I had died, would I have lived a life that would have said I could walk in my own truth without seeking the validation of the world? And the truth of the matter is, I came out from that thinking, no, I hadn't. Like I was like 350 pounds when I married my wife. I got down to like 140 pounds because I thought that was how I was supposed to look. We have a nice house and nice cars and things like that because we assume like those are the things that are going to give us validation. And when people see it, then that's the confirmation that we belong. And I really left the hospital thinking never again. And so I would just encourage you to don't wait until you have one of those moments to say never again. Stop seeking confirmation in the eyes of other people or other things. Know that by virtue of you being alive, you belong. And the question isn't, do others see that? It's, what will you do with that sense of purpose because you're here, because you belong? And I will tell you, the last few months have been the most freeing of my life. I stopped shaving. I take showers, don't get me wrong. But like, I'm just like, look, I'm gonna do with it what is most authentic to me. And if that unnerves some people, okay. But the zero I give about what they think is zero.
Yeah. Well, and I just think, this idea of you will always find confirmation. There will always be something to prove you right, that you feel like you don't belong. It will be someone looked at you funny and you'll use that as confirmation. It will be someone said something about you and you'll use that as confirmation. It will be that you don't look like what everyone else looks like that's doing the thing that you want to do, and you will use that as confirmation. And I think even for myself, I was 29 years old when I started my business, and I was a Black female that was young, and everyone said, why are you doing this? Like, why are you doing this? You don't know enough. You don't have enough. You're not smart enough. Why would you do this? And I could have listened to all those voices, or I could have said, I know what I know, and I can figure the rest out, which is exactly what I did. And so I think that for a lot of us, especially any of us that are in a marginalized group, it is so easy to be stuck on the things that make us different and the things that make us feel like we don't belong or we're not good enough, when really this idea of we will always find that confirmation, like instead walk through the world recognizing that no one belongs here more than you. And that I just, like, it gets me every time. It gives me cold chills every time. And then the last quote is this, and that is, I'll leave you with this: there will be times when standing alone feels hard, too scary, and we'll doubt our ability to make our way through the uncertainty. Someone somewhere will say, don't do it. You don't have what it takes to survive the wilderness. This is when you reach deep into your wild heart and remind yourself, I am the wilderness. And so I wanted to just leave this with you all, and that is, you are the wilderness. You will always have that capability within yourself to be the wilderness. And as Colmon said a little bit earlier, it's just, what do you choose to do with that? And how do you choose to view yourself in this world, being the wilderness to yourself? So we will open it up for questions. I often like to challenge people to make one change. So based off of something that you heard tonight or one thing that you read in the book, what is one thing that you want to commit to doing moving forward with this information? It's not enough for Colmon and I to just come and talk to you and hang out with you for an hour. Like, what do you actually want to do with that? So if you want to put that in the chat, and if you have questions, you can put that in the chat as well. And then I'll also just share as you're typing, if you ever need anything or want to reach out to either Colmon or myself, here are some ways that you can do that. I post on Instagram every day a motivational message, just because of the work that I do with coaching. So if you're interested in following me on Instagram, it's just coach_Colene, or on Facebook, it's just Coach Colene. Or you can start getting an email that I send out every week called Monday Morning Pep Talks by texting the words "be more" to the number 66866. And then with Colmon, his email is just colmon.eldridge@gmail.com. And he is lighting it up on Twitter these days at just at Colmon Eldridge on Twitter. Colmon doesn't do Instagram.
I do not. No, I think there's all of 2 pictures on Instagram. Let me real quick go back to something, that last point, Colene. Colene and I have been the first to do so many things. And, you know, I think sometimes we marvel at the fact that we're usually the first person of color to do something, whether it was at Transy or in high school or even now. I became the first person of color to be the chairman of either political party here in Kentucky over the weekend. And I think we always sit in awe of the fact, and not in selfish awe, but in awe of the fact that it was not done before us. And the reason I bring that up is there will be times where the wilderness is, you are maybe the first to do it. You're the first in your family to go to college. You're the first in your family to maybe move out of where home is and do something different. There'll be a litany of reasons. And that can feel isolating. It can feel emotionally draining and daunting. It can feel like, and oftentimes Colene and I heard, what, you think you're better than us, or you're too good for us now. Be comfortable enough in who you see yourself becoming, that you are willing to stand in that uncomfortable nature, to be the first, to do something that maybe hasn't been done before, to break new ground. Because if not you, then who? right? I mean, that at the end of the day is what I think has allowed us to kind of forge ahead, which is like, okay, we may be the first, but okay, like somebody's going to have to cross this bridge. We also cross those bridges with the realization that we have to make sure those doors are open for folks to come after us. And I think anytime that we've been the first, we've crossed those bridges with a sense of duty and responsibility to make sure that others could stand in their truth, in their wilderness, and still come and do not only what we've done, but do it better. And so I would also just leave you with that you might be the first. Live in that reality, and then build a bridge so that others who come after you can live in their truth, but take it to the next level.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment on one of the comments that came in the chat from Brandon, who said he doesn't want to get knocked down when, things don't work out or things don't work out the way that you want. I just need you to know, Brandon, that is a part of life, right? That things won't always work out, but it's not always easy to not feel knocked down. And I know even last week I called my brother and I said to him, you know what sucks about resiliency is that shit has to not work in order for you to become more resilient, right? Like that's what sucks, is you don't get to be more resilient by everything working out in your favor. And so one of the things that I would encourage all of us to think about, and one of the questions that I always ask myself is, what am I supposed to learn from this? And how is this working out for me, not against me? And I think a lot of us, when things don't work out the way we want them to, will say things like, why would this happen to me? Or we instantly kind of default into a victim mode of something has happened to me. And I have started asking myself, why did this happen for me? What is it that I'm supposed to learn from this, right? And it might be 20 years from now that you can see the reality of the situation. I remember a few years ago, I had applied for this fellowship in Egypt, and I had made it to the final round. I was like one of the 10 that they were actually interviewing to do this like month-long fellowship in Egypt. And I didn't get selected, and I was distraught because I knew that I was like the perfect candidate for it. And the day that they were in Egypt was the day that Egypt shut down, and all of the Americans had to evacuate Egypt. And I remember thinking, I could have been one of those people there, and I would not handle that well at all, right? Like the Lord knows that I would not handle that kind of chaos well at all. And so sometimes things are happening to protect you, and sometimes things are happening for your favor. And so even when things don't work out, just ask yourself, like, what am I supposed to learn from this, and how can I learn something more from this, instead of just defaulting to, why is this happening to me?
And I'd say one of the things that we do in our household is we quote the brilliant poet Jay-Z. Anytime my kids or I mean, we all kind of hold ourselves accountable, or we hold each other accountable by this measure. When we start to think, oh, like we're gonna get knocked, or we've been knocked down, or some, like it'd be nothing for like my 2-year-old to like see me kind of, if I've had a hard day with like my head down, he's like, Daddy, dirt off shoulder. And I mean, that's just kind of the way that we kind of soldier through those hard times, or the times that we get knocked down. We're like, okay, dust your shoulder off, get up, go again, and learn from it. And so I will tell you, Brandon, if my 2-year-old can tell me that, like, trust me, you can do it. And
we've got someone frozen.
Hove is literally never wrong.
And then Gavin just wanted to let you know, it's okay to play sad music at 3 a.m. and stare at the ceiling. I do that sometimes too. Sometimes you just get it out of your system and then you move on, right? You got to cry it out and then you move on, and it's fine. Like, trust me, that's a normal part of feeling like, why isn't anything working? So you're not alone with that at all.
Yeah, no, my kids know, and my wife knows that, like, I'm just gonna need everybody to be quiet. If they can come into the house and I'm in the basement listening to Fiona Apple, like that is usually the sign that I'm just gonna like stare at the ceiling
I need a minute.
and
Yeah. I
question
need a
life.
minute. Yeah. When
So
it's Alanis Morissette for me, that's when it's like, my husband will always say, like, I'll give you a minute. I'm like, yes, please do. So any questions? The chat's been fun. You all have been
Yes.
fun in the chat.
like the steak thing is having me rethink being a vegan now. Like I shouldn't want one as much as I do now, but y'all are good. Yeah, good.
Any questions? Any questions before we wrap this up? So I know a lot of folks are sending out messages in the chat with their Instagram, their Snapchat, also that you're here. Marcus does want to know, what is the purpose of life? I don't know if we can address this tonight, but I will say, Joel Price, let's not share our screen, Joel Price. So with that said, do I have any, I'm gonna shut that down. I don't realize if he knows he's done that.
There we go.
There we go. So any questions in the chat?
I'll say
don't-
this
Yes.
in all seriousness to the question of what is the purpose of life. I think if you figure it out before you die, then you're doing the wrong thing.
Ooh.
Because, you know, there's a sense, and I've said it throughout this conversation, to walk with purpose. But it's not necessarily that you always know where the destination is. And some of the people, you know, I look at folks like Martin Luther King Jr., who, you know, I'll be 39 next month. He was assassinated when he was 39. I think of so many people that—
Sorry about that, you know, I didn't know that I was doing that.
Not a problem, Joel. I think of so many people that have died before we would say it was their time, and folks that have lived long, full lives. And one of the things, if you read readings of folks that are kind of at both ends of this, there's always this sense that they didn't figure it out, that there was something else that they maybe were supposed to do if only they had the gift of time. And what you end up finding out is that you did all that you could do with the time that you had to hopefully make a better contribution. And so figuring it out is kind of, I think, a fool's errand, because then you'll get to the end of your life and say, well, I didn't do this and I didn't do that, and I didn't climb this mountain. But what you did probably had a much greater impact. And so, again, it was one of those realizations I came to in the hospital, but it was to stop chasing the meaning of life and start living it. And in hopes that, you know, history is always written after you're gone. That's just the truth. Like, you can write your own autobiography, but you will be judged in history after you're gone. And so focus on each day and each minute and each second and what you're doing in that moment, and leave it to others to kind of figure out what it was worth and what it meant. Just old guy advice.
Yeah. And I will say, I think for me, much along those lines, but also really always questioning, am I using the gifts that I've been given to the best of my ability? Like, I want to be able to know that I left this life not letting fear hold me back from using those gifts. And how have I utilized those gifts to impact the world? One of the stories that I tell people at the end of one of the speeches I give is, you know, I've had this idea of one day when I die, I meet the best version of myself. And my goal is that when Colene meets the best version of Colene, that we recognize each other, and that I don't say to myself, oh, that's what I could have been, that I've done all that I could to leave this world a better place. That to me is what I strive for every day, is how am I living up to the gifts that I've been given with whatever amount of time that I've been given to use them.
We do have one question. Do you agree that wisdom comes more from experience than anything else?
Yes.
Yes.
I always use the example that my oldest son turned 11 yesterday, and I remember almost every baby shower that we had for him, folks would give us books, and my wife and I were just convinced that we had to not only read the books but memorize them, and if we just did that, we would become perfect parents. And somewhere along the first week, we were like, "You people are crazy, and you fucking lied." Because there is no rule book about how to be a parent. And there is no way that if I just do this one thing, this kid is one, gonna be alive, two, stop crying, or three, not get me crazy within an inch of my sanity. And 11 years later, it's still true. Like, one of the things that my kids have figured out during COVID is that my wife and I are making it up every day. Literally every day. We just take the experiences of the days before and we're like, this is how we apply it to like keep you alive and teach you lessons to make sure that you are contributing productive young people. Now, my 2-year-old is literally trying to kill me. Like, he does not sleep. He kind of looks like Stewie from the Family Guy. He has a little bit of a British accent because his nana is from England. Like, it's like, he's insane. But even that, like, we're learning. But it's all about experiences, and that's part of the essence of life, is that the wisdom you gain. I have never heard of somebody saying, I gained this wisdom because of all the books that I read. It is almost always based not on what you've read, but how then you've applied it to your life, and through those experiences, you gain wisdom. You gain a sense of knowledge that you might not have ever had.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
no.
and I would say someone else asked, like, how do you find your purpose? And it's just through trying things, like having the courage to try different things. And if that's not it, to be willing to say, this isn't it, let me try something else. And I think so many times we say to ourselves, right.
Don't try that.
Colmon doesn't like mashed potatoes. I love mashed potatoes. Colmon doesn't like them, but but I think oftentimes we will say, "Oh, I didn't like that, but I'm stuck here because I made this decision." You're not stuck. Like, just decide to try something else, and I think that's fine. Gavin is just you're having some heartbreak, Gavin, and I just want you to know I'm thinking about you. And if y'all do get together and listen to sad music, I need one of y'all to tag me in a post on Instagram that y'all are listening to sad music in the middle of the night. But please be responsible while you do it, okay?
And Gavin, let me just tell you, heartbreak is real and it sucks, but you learn so much more about yourself by going through it. You learn how you deal with hurt and disappointment. You also begin, and I think I mentioned this earlier, you also begin to understand what you are worth. And at the end of the day, that's what makes relationships work. When both people come into that relationship, into that space with a clear understanding of what they're worth and a clear realization that you will treat the other person, the other person will treat you, not how they want to treat you, but how you demand you be treated. My wife, when I met her, I kid you not, let me know she does not cook, she does not clean, she does not sew. 20 years in, we do not trust her to cook. She still does not clean. And if she sews something, God bless you. But that was something that I knew was a non-negotiable. Now, like, she can bake, that nobody's business. But if you want like food to eat, I mean, if you want to live on cake, go for it. If you want like a food thing, it is not my house or it's not her that you want to be with. So yeah, it sucks. And the great thing about heartbreak, if there's a great thing about it, is you are not the only person to have gone through it, nor will you be the last. Our mom told us that several times.
Yeah, that would always make me so mad when she would say, God didn't stop making when he made him. And I'm like, that's not helpful, but it's true. So, but well, I know we've gone over
opposite of
I know we've gone over. Colmon, I'm going to cut you off because we've gone over. But we do want to thank you all for having us and for being so engaged in the chat and being so fun in the chat. And if you all ever need anything, please do not hesitate to reach out to either one of us. We are literally just right up the street. We would love to answer any questions or go to coffee or tea or whatever.